Ben Young from the Business New Zealand Energy Council is going to talk about New Zealand in a changing energy world. So I'll just say some comments about Ben. So Ben is the policy advisor for the Business New Zealand Energy Council, where he supports the development of policy submissions, engages with key stakeholders, assists in event coordination, and monitors emerging trends and developments in the energy sector. So he holds a master's degree in international studies and a Bachelor of Arts in politics, philosophy and economics from the University of Otago. Oh, great.
Yeah.
So I'll pass it over to you, Ben.
Fantastic. Can everyone hear me? Is this working? Perfect. I might actually just move this aside. Is there a click or anything, or am I just hitting me? Okay. Let's see. Perfect. I've got my notes here because it's been a very busy time for us lately, so I haven't actually had as much time as I would have liked to really nail down this presentation. But good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Young, and basically that introduction just covered pretty much my whole first slide, so that's pretty easy. I cover policy across all aspects of the energy sector, so our membership is very broad. We cover electricity generation, retail and distribution, as well as gas and engine fuels. So we are really a very broad church, and that keeps us very busy. My presentation today is covering two key themes or topics that we're been focused on this year at BEC. The first is the emerging themes that we're seeing around the world at the moment as through our role as the New Zealand Member Committee of the World Energy Council, and particularly out of World Energy Week, which was in Panama this year. And so I'll share about the key takeaways and emerging themes that I had from that. And then the second part, and probably longer part of this presentation, is around a benchmarking report that we did earlier this year, where we basically took New Zealand and compared us across a whole range of countries across the three aspects of the energy trilemma. So energy security, affordability, and sustainability. And then I'll wrap up with a little bit of the future of the energy trilemma itself. Before I do get into that, for those who don't know about BEC, I'll give a very brief overview. BEC truly is kind of part of a global network. As you can see on the screen at the moment, we are a subsidiary brand of Business New Zealand, which is New Zealand's largest business advocacy firm. And through the combination of our business groups, including Business New Zealand Energy Council and others, we are able to tap into the views and perspectives of 76,000 employers and businesses. So we have a really quite wide range of views to tap into, and that helps inform our advocacy and improve what we're arguing for New Zealand Inc. Beyond just the domestic context, we are also part of a collection of global organisations. So we are representatives at the ILO, we are a business advisory for the OECD, and crucially for this conversation, we are the New Zealand Member Committee of the World Energy Council. This is a very quick overview of our membership group. I'm not going to go through them all because we'll be here all day, but it is a very broad church. And our mission is advocating for a sustainable, affordable, and secure energy future, so balancing the three aspects of the energy trilemma. That's our how. I'm not gonna touch on that because I know we're probably pressed for time. But what is the World Energy Council? The World Energy Council is almost the only independent, non-political global organization that covers the entire energy sector. It was founded in 1923 and currently represents over 3,000 organizations through 100 member committees around the world. So it's truly a global group, and we're pretty proud of the work that we can do with them. As said previously, I was lucky enough this year to attend as the New Zealand delegate the World Energy Week in Panama, and there were two kind of key purposes behind that week. The first was to facilitate international dialogue amongst the member committees. So there's not many chances that we can all get together and talk about the kind of shared challenges that we're all facing in the global energy context, and this is a really valuable one for us to sit down. And then the second is to educate attendees around things that they might not know about that are coming around in terms of technology, innovative policy, and other matters that are becoming pressing for us. That is a very kind of brief flashpoint overview of BEC and the World Energy Council. And I'll move into actually some key global takeaways now. So the first key global takeaway that I took away from World Energy Week this year was the concept of humanizing energy. So this is the overarching vision of the World Energy Council. And they call it, or they describe it as a call to reconnect the energy system with its social purpose. And for me, taking that and applying that idea to myself, that's pretty multifaceted. The world is currently going through a pretty rapid change, as we heard in the first session from a number of speakers, both in the speed and the scale of which that change is occurring. And that change presents a massive opportunity, but it also presents a massive uncertainty for a lot of people around the world, particularly those that are in the most affected groups. From this perspective, there was definitely a notable emphasis on how we can best equip people to face that challenge and that uncertainty moving forward. And adapting to that uncertainty means we need to invest more into the skills, resilience, and social equity within our energy system. One of the great parts of the week was hearing from other member committees from around the world on how they are tackling with those very real problems. And there's a lot of work that's being currently done in the space globally. So Colombia, for example, has a national initiative that they call Training the Next Heroes of the Energy Sector, where they basically run training camps on STEM subjects to try and encourage kids as young as primary school age to consider careers in the energy system. Panama has a very similar program. And Saudi Arabia has a really, really cool initiative as well, which they call Empowering Africa, where they will basically go down into Africa and help electrify villages that haven't had access to energy before, and supply them with things like clean cooking tools and things like that to help improve quality of life through energy access. Beyond that part of humanizing energy, there's another perspective which I think probably resonates a little bit more with me, with my role in Business New Zealand. But that is drawing on the links between energy, GDP growth, and standard of living. So there's pretty clear links between the three of those. And I think too often, particularly in the conversations I'm having, we get caught up in talking about markets and technologies and all these things that are really interesting if you're in the sector. But sometimes we lose sight of the fact that energy is actually an enabler of a whole bunch of other activities. And that should be the focus of the sector, is what we can achieve for other people, not what we can achieve for the sector itself. The photo on screen at the moment is, I think, a really great example of encapsulating humanizing energy. This is a village that I was lucky enough to visit while I was in Panama, in the middle of a national park that they have. And this community, up until about 30, 40 years ago, had no interaction with the outside world. And until about five years ago, they'd had no power access at all on the island. And that didn't change until they were gifted a collection of solar panels. And then that's the only energy that they have on the island. For them, that has created a really massive change. Previously, as soon as the sun set, that was basically all activity done for the day. And that limited people's behavior. After the introduction of solar panels, they had about 2 hours of light at the end of the day now. And so for their kids who were coming back from school, that meant they could study just that little bit longer. And now they're seeing tangible effects from that. So that's just one example of something that humanizing energy can do. The second quite large theme that came out of this week was the fact that energy security seems to have well and truly overtaken sustainability as the key focus, at least in terms of the conversations that we were having this year. There are several things that we identified as what was driving this shift. So recent geopolitical events, things like the Russia-Ukraine war and actions in the Red Sea, has increased the thinking around violent threats to energy systems. But also things like the Trump presidency has led to an increased politicization of the energy sector, which is forcing countries into prioritizing their own national self-interests more than they would have otherwise. Rising energy demand is placing additional stress on the system as well, and there's a heightened risk awareness around the current state of grids following large-scale blackouts through Spain, Portugal, and other places around the world. These in combination have accelerated concerns around energy security and resiliency, which has shifted the emphasis of discussion. That being said, the emphasis on security doesn't necessarily overtake sustainability. In my head, it integrates the two of them into a shared framework. You don't necessarily have to have security without sustainability. There's a whole bunch of actions that we can take that can progress both at the same time. Investment in renewables can help reduce import dependence, that can help reduce commodity price shocks and all these other things. So there are definitely things that can be balanced between the two, but the framing of those investments has certainly shifted. On screen, this is Panama's LNG import terminal. It was a pretty good time to be visiting Panama in October, right after the Frontier report came out, and LNG was very hot on everyone's minds. But LNG serves as a really, really important part of Panama's energy security discussion. They actually have a very similar generation profile to us in terms of hydro generation. So about 60% of their country's electricity comes from hydro. And so they face some of the same dry year risks that we face here in New Zealand. And imported LNG is the solution that they've come with. For them, dry year risk is actually probably a little bit more of a concern than it is in New Zealand. So their hydro dams, the water for that also gets used to have the functionality of the Panama Canal, which is their core economic cornerstone. And it also supplies all the fresh water to their major cities. So for them, a dry year risk is not just about increasing electricity costs, but it's also kind of a potential GDP crasher as well. So water management for them is crucial, and LNG is the way they're doing that. The third big theme that I took away from this year is that decarbonisation strategies cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. There's a clear consensus that while all countries do need to move towards decarbonisation, it cannot be done at all pace and at all cost, particularly for a lot of countries around the world where if they do move into policies that move too quickly on decarbonisation, the ones that are most affected in their communities are those of the lowest socioeconomic groups. So really it's an energy equity question as well at that point. The starting point for decarbonisation matters quite a lot as well. In New Zealand, we are incredibly blessed to have a very renewable electricity system. And so for us, decarbonisation is almost just a question of how much can we shift into electricity and really benefit from that renewable system. For parts of the world where their renewable grid or renewable system is far less developed and they're relying more on fossil fuels for electricity generation, their decarbonisation journey is much more complicated and costly than ours potentially would be. I had a really interesting conversation while I was in Panama with a future energy leader from Saudi Arabia. And we were having a conversation between us from New Zealand and a group of people from Australia around our decarbonisation. And she just piped in and said, hey, look, for us, it's just about getting off as much oil as we can. Yes, we're going to build a whole bunch of solar, but we acknowledge that for at least the medium term, natural gas is the only really alternative that we have. And that's just, shifting from the heavy emitters like coal and oil into the comparatively lighter emission profile of natural gas. The final big theme before I move on into some more domestic contexts is around unlocking financing for energy projects. So as countries look to enhance their security, improve their affordability and increase sustainability, there's pretty significant investment that needs to take place both for new infrastructure and to upgrade existing infrastructure. And so financing is a really critical part of any energy conversation. We had a panel discussion in Panama where basically the energy heads of the largest global banks, they sat down and they talked about what were the barriers that they're seeing for financing of projects. And for them, it was all around kind of regulatory certainty and sovereign risk, really. And that was echoed in a poll discussion, or a poll that we had for all the leaders in the room as well, where we were asked what's the number one financing barrier that you'd look to remove if you could, and overwhelmingly the result to that is sovereign risk. We're pretty lucky in New Zealand that historically sovereign risk hasn't been a factor that is as bad for us as it is for many places around the world. But recently we're seeing increased policy flip-flopping on some pretty key energy policy. And there's been a kind of quite significant investment decisions from government that's been hanging over the sector for a while as well. So that has presented sovereign risk and needs to be worked through if we want to keep the investment, the private investment flowing that we need. Bankable long-term offtake agreements, such as PPAs, power purchase agreements, were also seen as a key enabler of financing individual projects. And that's a gap that we see in New Zealand in BEC. We see that power purchase agreements have pretty limited uptake here compared to a lot of other places around the world. And so we're pretty proud at the moment to be working with DLA Piper and EVA Marketplace on the development of a commercial PPA template, which will be ready for market hopefully at the beginning of next year, which will lower the barrier to entry, we hope, and help with those PPA discussions. That's a very flash in the pan overview of what was a very busy week. But yeah, kind of four key themes there, where we're definitely seeing a changing global energy agenda, and people need to be at the center of that transition. Number three is around the energy trilemma. And I think we're coming to the end of what has been a really difficult period of time for policymakers and leaders around the world in terms of balancing those aspects. And I think there's been an acknowledgement that that's not as simple as we originally thought. Okay, moving from that kind of global international context down into a domestic context, those global themes can help us understand how other countries are going through the similar challenges that we have. But to contextualize that, we did a whole bunch of benchmarking work earlier this year to actually see how we stack up compared to a lot of the countries that we do compare ourselves to. Before I get into that properly, I will just touch quickly on New Zealand's domestic reality, or at least as we see it at the BusinessNZ Energy Council. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this before, but I'll touch on it again anyway. Our energy system continues to advance towards sustainability. In 2023, we had 43% of our primary energy supply coming from renewables. And in the quarter ending December 2024, we had 94% of electricity generation coming from renewables. So renewable energy is increasing as a share within our domestic context, which is balancing a rise in oil consumption as well that we're seeing. However, industrial and transportation sectors are still heavily dependent on fossil fuels, and we're facing significant challenges in terms of energy security that require urgent attention around gas. In the past, we have been able to take advantage of our ample energy resources. Our major gas discoveries and the development of hydro generation positioned us to really take advantage of reliable, low-cost energy. However, due to policy-induced incentives and reliance on mature, near end-of-life fields, our gas supply is rapidly declining, much faster than previously anticipated, and investment confidence in that sector is at an all-time low. Gas-fired firming, flexible generation, and grid capacity all remain underdeveloped, but are desperately needed to keep downward pressure on prices, as highlighted in winter last year. Demand-side pressures are also growing with broad electrification across many areas, which places additional strain on our system. Sustained regulatory uncertainty, as mentioned before, has meant that investment in new gas production and flexible electricity generation has been muted, and the market has been largely able to survive some pretty testing times due to ad hoc industrial demand response and good weather. But long term, that's not something that we really want to continue. Yeah, that is a very quick overview. Into our benchmarking study. So over the whole study, we performed really quite well. We performed third overall in terms of average weighted results. And then some of our key metrics are seen on screen at the moment. We looked at 14 metrics, and they're not all on screen, and I don't have time to touch on all of them today. But we generally performed very well in most of them, excluding electricity wholesale price volatility and things like import dependence. So the purpose of this benchmarking report was to undertake a comprehensive and evidence-based understanding of how New Zealand's energy sector performs in comparison to a selected group of international peers. The primary purpose was to identify New Zealand's strengths and areas for improvement by systematically benchmarking our energy sector against those of other countries using the latest available data and performance metrics. The aim of this report was not to provide actionable recommendations and policy changes. As with any sort of like-for-like comparison, there's risk there. No countries are exactly the same. And so those sort of recommendations were something that we didn't see particularly valuable from this exercise. This was more to see the areas that we're doing well compared to some international peers. As previously said, our purpose was not to simply rank New Zealand, as any ranking would be inherently influenced by the selection of countries and metrics, but rather these rankings could be used as a tool to help frame and better understand New Zealand's energy sector performance in the broader international context. There are total and categorical rankings within the report, but they should not be seen as indicative of global rankings. By comparing our performance with leading countries in specific areas, the report showcases best practices and innovative policy measures that enabled the leading countries to succeed in their areas. Similarly, by examining the underlying causes of underperformance in certain metrics, we can identify common pitfalls, policy missteps, and systemic challenges that New Zealand should seek to avoid. Unfortunately, given the time of this presentation, I won't be able to touch on much of what is in the report, but I do encourage you all to give it a read. It's on our website at the moment, and it doesn't take long to actually skim through. So on screen at the moment is the list of metrics and countries covered in this report. We chose 15 countries to compare New Zealand to across this study, and they're here on the left. And they were chosen for a combination of factors. The first factor is performance diversity, historically within the World Energy Council trilemma rankings. So the World Energy Council does do a annual report every year that ranks basically the whole globe on the energy trilemma. And this was the only year that they didn't do it, which is why we undertook a smaller scale benchmarking study here. But we selected countries that were both historical top performers and historical bottom performers. We also selected countries based on trade relationships with us, as they're kind of potentially more front of mind for a lot of people in New Zealand. And we also finally selected countries based on geographical or economic similarities with New Zealand, because we saw them as potentially being more likely to be able to share policy learnings from. We chose 14 quantitative metrics to measure our study against, and those were against the three pillars of the trilemma, so security, affordability, and sustainability. And these three aspects in combination can give us a rounded analysis of the many competing factors that go into making a successful energy sector. The quantitative factors allowed us to have objective data-driven insights, but within those quantitative factors, we also wove in qualitative factors. to help understand some of the underlying causes for performance, and those are discussed in the report at length. Data was primarily taken from official government databases, but they were also taken from international institutions, including the IEA, World Energy Council, and World Bank, as well as peer-reviewed scholarly research. We really sought data relevancy where possible. We aimed for 2023 or 2024 data to allow a flat benchmarking. To allow for cross-country comparison, we did normalize a lot of the data as well, and where possible, we referenced that in the report. Like any research, we did have challenges with data collection. The first challenge that we really saw was the variability in data definitions across country, as well as collection methods and reporting periods. That presented room for misinterpretation if normalization was done wrong, or if it wasn't discussed at all, and we mentioned that through the report where relevant. We also saw that some qualitative factors are inherently very difficult to measure, but play a massive part in how energy systems perform. So that's things like geopolitical stability or cultural attitudes, and those are quite difficult for us to present within the report itself. Final challenge we had, which I talked to a little bit before, is that the selection of countries we had risked skewing the data. Because we had a small data set, any country that we had chosen would have skewed that in some sort of way. And because we didn't have the capacity to do a whole globe report, that was sort of something that we had no choice but to accept. So this is kind of a very broad overview of our New Zealand's results across the metrics. So we assessed our results across using two different methods of ranking. The first and original method of ranking that we had was basically taking the ranking across each individual metric and then averaging that for each country, and that would give us our total rankings. It became very apparent to me quite quickly that that does a really poor job in actually understanding the difference in performance between countries. That's quite a simple, flat approach. What we ended up going for here was a little bit more, had a bit more of an ability to actually understand the breadth of difference between performance of countries. And we basically took the sum of standard deviations across all metrics and applied that. And so we see that the average is actually 0, despite most of the countries being above 0. We have a few that bring it down quite a lot. Breaking down that total result further into the three aspects of security, affordability, and sustainability, we see that affordability was our worst performing pillar of the trilemma, despite still being above average. The main reason for the struggle that we had with affordability was around wholesale price volatility. So we actually saw that if you just take things like power purchase adjusted prices for engine fuels and electricity and energy poverty, we perform quite well at a 2.08. And as soon as you bring that volatility in, we drop quite significantly down to 0.11. For security, we also perform worse than we do for sustainability. And part of that is to do with our limitations as a small island import nation. We measured metrics like import dependency and things like that. And for engine fuels, which make up a pretty significant chunk of our energy consumption, we bring all of that in. So that's a limitation for us. Another limitation for us is that we, unlike some countries in Europe and other places, have no ability to connect to outside grids. And so all of our supply and demand has to be balanced within New Zealand, which is also another security challenge. We performed, probably unsurprisingly, incredibly well for sustainability. We saw a very high share of renewable electricity generation, as well as total renewable energy consumption. And we performed very high for air quality indexes as well. So that really informed our results for sustainability. I'm aware, due to the time constraints of this presentation, that I won't be able to go into all of the metrics that we use, but I picked two of the metrics that I found particularly interesting to explore within the paper. And the first that I thought I'd look at is our wholesale volatility. Ideally, for volatility, we would have looked at daily data points across the whole of 2024, and then applied that to our calculations on screen to find the coefficient of variation, which would give us a score for volatility. However, it became quickly apparent that data was incredibly hard to find. Many countries that were in our data set don't actually have wholesale markets or spot markets, and ones that do often weren't reporting daily data. What we ended up doing instead is going down to monthly averages, and then we found the coefficient of variation across months instead. We managed to find data for 9 of the countries that were in our report, and the best performers were Ireland and Greece, and the worst performance were ourselves and Canada. Ireland has some quite interesting ways of dealing with their wholesale price volatility. And that's due to several interconnected factors. So a key element of that low volatility is their interconnection with Great Britain through HVDC cables, and they allow them to balance supply and demand within the Great Britain system as well. And Ireland also operates a capacity market as well. And within that market, interconnectors, storage systems, and industrial demand response can all bid in to offer up demand or provide supply during times of system stress. And for them, that can help balance that volatility quite a lot. In contrast, in New Zealand, we operate on an energy-only market and have no interconnectors with other markets, which means that our volatility jumps up quite a lot. Interestingly, when we look at the trend in countries across wholesale volatility, and if we compare it to PPP adjusted residential electricity prices, we almost see an inverse relationship. So Ireland has one of the highest PPP adjusted electricity prices that we had in our data set, and places like Canada, the USA, and even ourselves had quite a lot lower prices. And so that seems to indicate that as soon as you start to bring in things like capacity payments, the average price that people end up paying rises. Oh, one more thing I thought I'd touch on here. New Zealand has a highly renewable electricity system, and that means that our system is highly dependent on weather. As systems become more renewable, volatility is almost something that we should be expecting, as the sun doesn't shine all the time, the wind doesn't always blow, and for us, as shown last year, the rain doesn't always fall. And so those renewable generation features are naturally slightly more volatile. The second metric I thought I'd briefly touch on is around electricity diversity of generation. Having a diverse system is, for us, for our analysis, the reason we included this was that it reduces the effect of externalities on the system if you have a more diverse system. And that's the same for many ecosystems around the world as well, where biodiversity is important to improve the kind of resilience of the area. And because of that, we use the Shannon index that you see on screen to calculate the diversity of the system, which is commonly used to calculate biodiversity. To basically make that work properly for us, we took every 0.1% of generation as a population of 1 within a total population of 1,000, and then used that to interact with the calculations. Once we had the Shannon index, we then applied it to an evenness converter here, which then gave us a score between 0 and 1, where 1 would have been the most diverse system that you could have had. that ratio is basically just that formula is basically just a ratio of the observed Shannon index score against the maximum Shannon index score for the population size. We found that within our data set, Chile and Germany were the two most diverse countries in terms of electricity generation, and they share some similarities between the two of them. For context, we rank as 0.599. They were both up in the mid 0.8s. The combinations that they share, Germany and Chile share, is a pretty balanced load between renewable generation while also maintaining significant coal and gas generation as well. So they maintain mixed systems. For us, we ranked 9th in terms of electricity diversity. And that's largely because hydro, as you see on screen, still makes a significant portion of our electricity generation, combined with the other generations that we see on screen. The report was not just about New Zealand. We also looked into some of the other countries that were within the data set as well, to try and explain why or explain better how some metrics link together across each other. I thought I'd look at a couple of those countries while we're here, just to kind of explain how other systems tend to operate. The first country I thought we'd look at is Iceland. Iceland was our second highest performer within our data set. So it went Australia, Iceland, and then us. They ranked first in terms of renewable electricity and renewable energy. They had the second lowest PPP adjusted residential electricity price. They ranked first for air quality and only had 34.1% import dependency, despite being an island nation. And the reason they have such low import dependency is because they've basically been able to shift all their residential and space heating requirements into either direct geoheat, which is a renewable source, or electricity, which for them is 100% renewable, largely coming from hydro and geothermal resources. Because their electricity generation comes from relatively low cost and high load factor renewable sources, once built, that is, of hydro and geothermal, it means that they also have quite low residential electricity prices. They're not being brought up by anything that has high marginal cost. That has attracted a lot of very energy intensive industries into the country. So things like aluminium smeltering, they are the 11th largest aluminium producer in the world. They produce 800,000 tons of aluminium a year, which is double what we produce in New Zealand. And more recently, they're getting increased interest from data centers, partly because of their low electricity prices, but also because of their renewable profiles and their cool ambient temperatures as well. They do have a very low diversity of generation though, because they've specialized in geothermal and hydro. The second country I thought we'd look at is slightly different. It is China, and China was one of the lower performers within our data set. They scored 13th out of the 16 countries in our study, and that reflects a mixed performance across the trilemma. So as we see here, they do perform quite strongly for security and affordability, but really are quite let down when it comes to sustainability. Despite rapid growth in renewable energy capacity over the last decade, the country still relies heavily on coal as its dominant energy source, which makes up about 60% of the country's electricity generation, and is used for direct heat purposes as well. China's renewable generation is expanding at massive scale, and they are now the largest user or consumer of renewable energy around the world, but they still have a significant portion of fossil fuels in there as well. China does do very surprisingly well for low energy import dependency, despite being the largest consumer of energy globally. They do have high proportions of that being produced locally. However, they import roughly 74% of their oil requirements, which leave them incredibly vulnerable to global supply disruptions around oil. And to mitigate this, China has begun to stockpile its oil products to a much larger capacity than they previously did. I think most interestingly about our research into China was how they've managed to achieve such low residential electricity prices, and they've done this through a number of factors. So the first way that they've done this is through cross-subsidizing their residential consumers against their commercial and industrial consumers. So their low cost doesn't necessarily come from low absolute input costs, but it comes from that cross-subsidization, which means that residential consumers are often consuming at lower than the cost of production, which we found quite interesting. And the second way they've done it is that they price electricity differently depending on consumption levels. So the lowest portions of consumers in society pay the least for electricity, and as you consume more and more and more, that price goes up. So that's a very brief look into two of the countries in our data set. Some of the more broad, interesting policy insights that we saw across the study was the link between capacity payments and cost of electricity, which I mentioned before. We also saw the impact of regulated electricity prices. So Iceland and China, which I don't think I actually mentioned, do both regulate their pricing as well. And while we see that put pressure to keep prices low, it also means that without government intervention, the normal investment signals that we'd see in the New Zealand market, for example, are muted. And so without government assistance in build, generation build stalls. We also saw some pretty interesting comparisons between renewables and electricity versus renewables and energy. So a significant portion of our data set did have quite high levels of renewable penetration in electricity generation, but that drops off quite quickly when it comes to total energy consumption. There are two countries that break that. The first is Iceland. They use significant amounts of direct geoheat as an energy source, which is renewable. And the second is Uruguay. Uruguay uses substantial volumes of biomass. They have quite large pulp and paper industries, and those industries use the offcut and the waste products of their own industry to produce energy. The final one I thought I'd touch on is the relationship between pre and post-tax costs on unleaded petrol. We saw a significant spread in the price of post-tax petrol across our data set. But once we stripped away those tax components, we actually saw for the vast majority of countries, it was almost equal in real terms in terms of price across those countries, which means that most of the spread we see is based on tax. And there's some explanations for that, like road user charges instead of direct taxes on fuel. I guess kind of finally, this report was meant to kind of inform, or is meant to inform discussions across government, industry, and consumers and communities. And we hope that this can help to inform a proactive approach to system management for New Zealand as we identify strengths and weaknesses for us. While we do have significant challenges ahead, which I think we're all probably in this room aware of, we are incredibly blessed to be in a position where we have the potential renewable energy resources that could help us achieve not only an affordable transition, but also one that has greater energy security than we would have otherwise had. One final thing from me today is a shameless plug for the World Energy Council. So the energy trilemma, which has been kind of a cornerstone of global discussion, especially actually in New Zealand, it's had a lot higher uptake in New Zealand than many other places around the world, is being changed. So it's currently going through a period of what the World Energy Council calls evolution. And that's based on an understanding that while the static kind of back-looking rankings that they have previously given are valuable in their own way, they no longer are sufficient to adequately explain the really rapidly changing energy landscape that we see around the world. And so what they're moving into is what they call the Energy Compass, which will hopefully provide action-orientated insights rather than just static rankings. Also aims to incorporate factors such as resilience, innovation, and social impacts within the traditional trilemma aspects as well. And that is everything from me. I know I kind of rushed from point to point quite a lot there, but does anyone have any questions on anything within that? Yep.
Just a moment.
Thank you, Ben. Just I guess the skeptic in me, the Energy Compass, is that nice words for essentially the woke backlash over the last 2 years? First question. Second question, if you can just explain a little bit about the membership of your group and yeah, maybe beyond that report, what are the 1 or 2 things that you'd like to see within the sector, acknowledging that you're representing nearly all the players within the energy sector?
Yeah, so to touch on the first question, I'm part of a working group for the modelling of that new that new tool, the Energy Compass, and it's retaining the core purpose of the trilemma, which is to assess countries based on performance. And so in that scope, it hasn't changed that much. What it is being changed to is taking those static rankings and trying to provide countries with examples of how they could potentially shift the needle for those. So it's instead of just kind of going into the World Energy Council website every year and going, oh, we've moved up 3 places or we've moved down 2 places, but I don't really know why or how I could move forward in the future. There's an acknowledgement that needs to be part of the discussion as well, rather than just providing the information. Yeah. On your second point, I think the number one thing for us is policy stability over successive governments. Our members across the board are finding it really challenging at the moment to make the long-term investment decisions needed in the sector when the rules are being changed on them quite regularly. Beyond that, we are advocating quite heavily for an energy strategy. The government has on multiple accounts expressed interest in that, but it then never seems to move past those initial conversations. So earlier in the year, we drafted a energy sector perspective on a government energy strategy, which we gave to MB about halfway through this year, and that's currently sitting on their desk, and that's been discussed with the minister as well. So that kind of has a full encapsulation of everything that we'd be wanting in the immediate future and the medium future. So I encourage you to have a read of that. That's kind of got our bucket list.
We've got one question online. C, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, kia ora. And sorry, I am gonna throw some bombs and see how you react to them. So I do energy justice research with the International Energy Agency's Users Technology Collaboration Program, and I get some real issues around some of those global measures and comparisons from a justice perspective. One of them is that energy equity index in the trilemma that the WEC uses, for example, seems to compare country like energy affordability by cost plus universal access, and you use the 10% indicator, the 10% method for energy poverty, which has long been criticized and is not used in this country because it overestimates disposable household income compared to actual energy needs. And there's also the issue around continually calling natural gas like a lighter emitter when recent research has shown that methane leakage is like 40% higher in emissions than what the official estimates actually use, or the sustainability tensions where we keep exploring critical rare earth minerals from high biodiversity or indigenous regions instead of reducing the Western demand for energy use. And so these country comparisons seem, and there's also always like the issues around colonization, like when Saudi Arabia, brings all these renewable energy things into poorer countries, and there's never no strings attached. So do these country comparisons lull us into a bit of a false sense of security that we're actually doing a lot better than what we are from a justice perspective? How do you, or am I being unfair here?
So your first, the question around the energy poverty and the use of the 10%, we looked at using other ways to assess that across the comparison. The really simple answer as to why we use the 10% rule is because it's the easiest to compare cross country. I acknowledge it's probably not the best method if you're doing a study into a specific country's energy poverty. But for us, unless we wanted to spend a year just doing that, the 10% method was the best in terms of just applicability for comparison. Around the justice stuff, that might have to be a conversation that is had one-on-one. I think we could probably hash that out for a while. But I think, the use of natural gas and things like that within a renewable system seems to become more important the more renewables you have in the system. So I was talking with someone from South Australia recently, and for them, they're more renewable than they've ever been, but the criticality of natural gas in that system has become more important than ever because of the volatility and the ability of natural gas to provide firming.
But it's not clean. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. But at the moment, there's no real alternative that is marketable and as cheap as it. So it becomes a question of is it being clean at all costs worth the cost increases for consumers, which is an ongoing debate within the sector, and I won't get into.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll have one more question. So Solis, I think.
Ben, I was trying to think up a question. I couldn't really get it, but I just wanted to say thank you for a really interesting talk. I think you occupy a really super important role in New Zealand's energy progress over the next 10 or 15 or 20, well, because you're still a young fella. And I hope you use every opportunity you get to amplify what I think you're thinking is really good. And you're across the space between the social bit and the practical part of it. So I take my hat off to you and keep up the good work.
Thank you.